In the middle of a crowded market, a man rides on a white horse. On either side of him, vendors are shouting, selling fruit and silverware and silk. Dust rises up off the gravel, coiling into the man's nostrils. As the horse clomps forward, the crowd parts. The man rides until he arrives at the feet of Jesus. He yanks on the rein, slides down off the saddle, and after retracting the hood on his finely woven robe, drops to his knees, looks up at Jesus and says, "Jesus, I have been looking everywhere for you." Jesus wipes the sweat off his brow, looks down at the man with nothing but compassion swirling in his eyes, and responds, "You know, it's funny, I've been looking everywhere for you too. What can I do for you?" The man inhales deeply and he says, "Well, Jesus, here's the thing. I've been living my life for multiple decades now, and I feel like I've only gotten a portion of the peace and the love and the courage and the joy that is potential in this world. I mean, I understand that this place isn't perfect. I understand this place is far from paradise, but I feel like I'm only experiencing a shadow of what life has to offer here. And so my question, Jesus, is how do I encounter and intersect with the fullest life possible?" Jesus smiles at the man. He briefly scans the bustling crowd moving back and forth through the market. And then he looks in the man's eyes and he says, "Full life, that's what you want." And the man says, "Yes." And Jesus says, "Well, you've heard of the 10 Commandments, right?" The man rubs his hands together and he says, "Oh, yes, Jesus. I've heard of the 10 Commandments. You know, everything from honor your mother and father, don't steal, don't murder, and all those I've done since I was a little boy. So is that it? I just obey these rules and then I encounter full life. Is that the deal?" And Jesus squints and he says, "Well, not exactly. If you really want full life, here's what I want you to do. I want you to stand up. I want you to climb back onto this impressive white horse that you have. I want you to ride out of this market, go up to the hills where your palace is, and then I want you to go into your palace, and I want you to go through every single room in this massive estate that you own. And in every single room, I want you to begin itemizing and selling off every single possession that you have accumulated in your multiple decades on this planet. I want you to sell off your fine art. I want you to sell off your dining room tables, every single chandelier. I want you to sell off your furniture. I want you to sell off your robes and your sandals. I want you to sell everything. And then once you've sold off every single possession in every single room in this massive palace, I want you to sell the palace itself." And so in the middle of the crowded market, the man on his knees, he looks up at Jesus and he furrows his brow and scratches his forehead and he says, "Okay, well, then will I experience full life?" And Jesus reaches his hand down, touches the man's shoulder, and he says, "Actually, I wasn't finished yet." See, once you've sold off every single possession and once you've sold off your palace, then I actually want you to sell off all the surrounding property because you own acre upon acre upon acre. And so once you sell off all the property, I want you included with that to sell off all your herds and all your livestock and then all the servants that you have. I mean, you have an entire army of servants that tend to this land. I want you to tell them all to go find new work. And now the man on his knees, beginning to regret that he asked the question to begin with, he says, "Well, Jesus, then will I experience full life?" And Jesus replies, "I still wasn't done." See, once you've sold off your palace, and once you've sold off your possessions, and once you've sold off all your property, and once you've released all your servants, then I want you to go through every single neighborhood in this town where you have constructed and built up a business. And I want you to shutter that business's doors. I want you to tell everyone that you are no longer open. All the commerce that you have flooded into this city over the last few decades, I want you to withdraw it. I want you to shut down everything. And then I want you to take all the money that you have acquired from selling your businesses, your palace, your property, your possessions. I want you to take all that money, put it in one giant bag, and then I want you to walk through town and literally just start shoveling the money out to everyone else and give every single dime away. And the man on his knees, he looks down at the ground. He can see the shadows of moving people dancing back and forth on the gravel. And he looks up at Jesus and he says, "Jesus, if I do all that, then will I experience full life?" And Jesus says, "Well, here's why I want you to do it." See, once you do all that, I don't want that to be the end with it. To really get full life, I want you to do that so that I want you to sell off everything, give everything away, so that then you can come and walk with me. I don't just want you to give everything away. I want you to give everything away so that then you can spend every single day with me, so that you would open your life fully to me, and that I in turn would open my life fully to you, and that every single day, every single hour, every single minute, every single second, it would be you and I together until the day you die. And I promise you, if you do that, you will find full life. And so now the man in the middle of the crowded market, he closes his eyes. And as the din and the bustle begins to quiet in his ears, he pictures in his brain a pair of iron scales. And on one side, he initially positions the offer Jesus has made to relinquish everything and spend his life with him. And initially in his mind, the scales tip towards Jesus' proposition. But then in his mind, one by one, he begins placing on the other side of the scale all the things that Jesus has just asked him to sell off and walk away from. And so he puts on his fine art, and the scales tip just a little bit. And he puts on his furniture, and they tip more. And he puts on his palace, and his servants, and his reputation in business, and his power, and all these wonderful things that he's accomplished. And he puts on every single achievement he's made. He puts on all his property, all his livestock, all his herds, all his servants, until in his mind he can see and hear the iron scale clank down opposite Jesus towards all the things that he's acquired. And even before the man on his knees opens his eyes, he knows what he is going to do, and so does Jesus. The man opens his eyes, and Jesus, with nothing but compassion for him, says, "What do you think?" And the man bows his head, and he says, "Jesus, I can't do that. You're asking for way too much." And Jesus stands there. He says, I understand. I know it's not easy. And the man stands up. He climbs back onto his impressive white horse. He rides back off through the market. The crowd closes behind him. And this individual that we read about in Mark 10 is never heard from again in the Bible. Never heard from again. This guy, if you read the story in Mark 10, he's called the rich young ruler. He was willing to engage Jesus with most of his life, with the majority of his life, with a lot of his life. The problem is Jesus wasn't asking him for a lot of his life. Jesus wasn't asking him for the majority of his life. Jesus wasn't asking him for most of his life. Jesus said, no. I don't want most or the majority or a lot. I want all of your life. I want all of it. And if I had been on my knees in the market that day, in that man's place 2,000 years ago, I would have done the exact same thing that he did. I do it in my life every day now. This request that Jesus makes of the rich young ruler to relinquish everything and come with him, he doesn't just ask that of him, he asks that of all of us. And if I had been in that place 2,000 years ago, I'm sure I would have responded the same way. I would have gotten up and walked away, and I probably would have walked all the way home thinking, that's so crazy. That's an insane request that he just made of me, to give up everything so that he and I could be together. If it's not crazy, it's at least completely unfair. And y'all, you know what? Maybe it is. Maybe the fact that Jesus asks for all of you, not most of you, for all of you and all of me, maybe it is crazy. Maybe it is completely unfair. But then again, maybe it's not. I'm a large fan of the cinema. I love films. As part of my job as a writer, I probably watch 3 or 4 movies a week. And I can kind of get down with most movies across the genre spectrum. I love drama, love documentaries, get down with a good comedy, a good action film, even a Western. And now that I've been married for almost 11 years, I have, over the course of time, even swung into mild affection for a genre called the romantic comedy. Now, I understand that they are flawed through and through. I understand that completely. And part of the flaw of the romantic comedy is the plot is almost always the same, right? If you've seen one, you've seen them all. The scene opens on a girl in a really nice dress, and her car breaks down, and she walks into the wrong side of town, into this garage where a guy slides out underneath, and he's got a grease stain on his face, and he's like, "Hey." And then he stands up, and they begin talking, and he wipes off his hands with a rag, and they look in each other's eyes, and then they realize that beneath the differences on the surface, they're really the same inside. And so now, slowly, right around the 13-minute mark of this movie, they begin to fall in love, right? Everything is perfect. They go on romantic dates. They ride horses on the beach, even though they live nowhere near a beach. Okay? There's no clouds in the sky. Michael Bublé is singing like every single soundtrack song throughout every single scene. Okay, we proceed on until now he has to meet the girl's dad, and now there's a problem, and she realizes, maybe we're really too different after all. For the first time in the movie, there's clouds. It's raining. Rain is dripping through Ryan Gosling's beard, right? And so we go on. We get to the 111-minute mark in the movie, and the movie's only 122 minutes, so now there's 11 minutes left. And we as the audience are left wondering, are they going to reconcile, or is this entire thing going to fall apart? Even though we know on the movie poster it says romantic comedy, not Shakespearean tragedy. We know they're going to end up together, and yet somehow we feel our souls hanging in the balance with these made-up characters. And so we sit there and we watch, and then some crazy circumstance brings them together. Okay, and they're standing there again after this big fight, and finally they look at each other. And one of them says something like this to the other. They go, look, here's what I know. I know we're completely different. I know you drive me absolutely insane. I cannot explain nor understand or comprehend 98% of the decisions that you make. But in spite of your flaws, I cannot bear the thought of living one moment without you. I would give up anything to be with you. So right here and now, I want every single part of your heart, every single part of your mind, every single part of your soul, every single part of your life from this day forward, now until the day I die. So we watch that scene, right? And none of us wants to admit that we're internally weeping. None of us wants to admit that we're kind of being caught up in this typhoon of love that we're watching play out. And though we know it's cheesy, and though we know it's unrealistic, and though I've never stood in a rainstorm and professed my love to my wonderful wife, though that's never happened, there is something deep inside of me through all that gloss that realizes that I am still witnessing a shadow of true love. And what I mean by that is I know that though it's cheesy, I know that love asks for all of another person. I know that the shadow of love that I'm seeing in that reconciliation scene in the romantic comedy, I know there is something true about it when the person says, look, I love you too much to only get part of you in return. And when I see it in a romantic comedy, I recognize it as love. But when I hear it from Jesus, I think he's just being unfair. Is it possible that when Jesus stands with the rich young ruler and he says, look, I love you too much to only get part of you in return? Is it possible that when Jesus says, I want you to get rid of everything that may come between us, is it possible that these aren't the words of a cruel or crazed tyrant, but perhaps the words of a loving king, of a God who says, I love you too much to only get most of you? Perhaps these are the words of a God who understands that if you really want to live fully, if you really want to come alive in every single corner of who you are, if I really want to come alive in every single corner of who I am, then I have to engage him in every single corner of who I am. Maybe these are the words of a God who knows that sometimes it's the smallest part of our lives that get the strongest hold on us and strangle life from us. And so he says, I want all of you. But the rich young ruler doesn't want that. He says, I'll give you most. I'll give you the majority. I'll give you 90% of who I am. But there is this 10% of my life that I'm going to hold back because I think that this part of my life will be more fulfilling if I do it without you. And so my first question to you this morning is, what's your 10%? What is that area, that place, that dimension of your life where you are saying, God, I'll engage you with all this area of my life, but this part, no offense, God, I just want you to stay out of it. Maybe for some of us, we say, yep, God, I'm in with you all the way except for this one area. What's your 10%? Maybe for some of us, it's something as, I say simple, and I know it's not simple, but as simple as love. And we say, God, I know you want me to love everyone, regardless of what they think, regardless of what they believe, regardless of how they behave. I know you want me to love everyone, and I will. But then in the back of our head, in the back of our heart, we have this one person or this one kind of person where we say, but I'm not going to love them. God, I'm going to love everybody, but not my dad, because he's hurt me too badly and he doesn't deserve it. God, I'll love everybody, but not people that behave this way. Not people that do this. Not people that aren't like me. Not people that don't agree with me. Not people who aren't kind to me. What's your 10%? What's the part you hold back? Now, for me, if I'm being honest, for me, it's not like what's my 10%, it's like what's my 50% that I hold back? Or like what's my 80% that I hold back? For some of us, it's probably something like an insecurity. You know, we look in the mirror, we look at our talent, we look at our gifts, we kind of play that really, really destructive game of comparison with other people, and we say, yep, God, I'm going to engage you in all these areas of my life, but I don't want to deal with you on these insecurities that I have about me. I don't want to talk to you about that. I don't want to think about that. I don't want to think about the fact that I may not, in my mind, be able to contribute to the world as powerfully or profoundly as some of the other people that I sit in the same chapel row as. I don't want to deal with that, so I'm just going to stick it down low. I'm going to hide it. I'm going to pretend it's not there. For some of us, the part that we hold back, maybe it's like a fear. You're afraid you don't matter. You're afraid, your life has no purpose. Maybe for some of you, the area you don't want to engage God in, it's an area of doubt. And you think, I'm not allowed to engage God on this. I'm not allowed to have doubts. And God is going, no. When I say I want all you, I mean even the stuff you don't like and you think that is not permissible. Sometimes those are the areas of our lives where God is most eager to engage us. What's your 10%? What's the area you're holding back? For some of us, and I mentioned this yesterday, maybe it's someone we don't want to forgive. We say, yep, God, yep, you are forgiving, I will forgive, but not this person, not this thing they did to me. What is the area you are holding back? Is it possible that to encounter full life, that we perhaps have to stop holding back from God? Is it possible that maybe in the areas we are most readily holding back, God is most eager to bring life? Y'all, it is in the darkest areas and corners of our lives where we are at the threshold of encountering the most light. It is in the areas of our souls that feel the most dead that if we would only engage God in them, we might experience the most life. And that's what God asked of the rich young ruler, and that's what he asks of us. He says, will you engage me with all of you or just most of you? Let me tell you another story. We're going to kind of advance this theme along. So let's see, it was about 8 years ago now. I got a phone call from my older sister. I was living with my wife, Kristen, in Austin, Texas at the time. My older sister, whose name is Corbett, was living in Chicago at the time. And she called me, and her and I speak on the phone somewhat regularly, so this was by no means an out-of-the-blue incident. She calls, and we talk for a while, and she says, Josh, I have amazing news. And I'm like, great, I love amazing news. What is it? And she says, well, I think I know what I really want to do with my life. I have this dream. I know what I want to do. And immediately when I hear through my little cell phone receiver what she's saying, I flash back to our childhood. Because in our childhood, my older sister, Corbett, had this ambition of being on Broadway. And according to my completely amateur analysis, I thought she had the ability to do it. I mean, she was like your classic triple threat. She could sing, she could dance, she could act. And so to me, even as a kid, it was just inevitable, that she would end up there. And so when she calls me on the phone 8 years ago and she says, I know what I want to do, I say to her, oh my gosh, you're going to be on Broadway. This is so exciting. You're going to be in Cats. I will be there opening night in the front row, dressed as a cat to celebrate your premiere. She's like, no, that's super weird, and no, that's not what it is. And I go, well, what is it? Like, what's got you, so inspired inside? And she says, well, my husband and I, we've decided we want to try to have kids, want to have a family. And like immediately, I slip into this uncle skin that I didn't even know that I had. And already I'm like envisioning all the things that I'm going to want to do with this little boy or girl someday, and the books we're going to want to read, and the movies we're going to want to see, and the conversations we're going to have. And so, fortunately for them, my older sister Corbett, she got pregnant, and right around 8 months, it was about a month before her due date, I get a phone call. It's really late at night. And she says, Josh, I'm going into labor. I know it's about a month early. I'm going to labor, but could you please come to Chicago and be here? Now, an important part of this story at this point was just a year and a half earlier, my dad had died. And then a couple weeks after him, my mom had died. So we lost, mom and dad just a few weeks apart. And so when my older sister said, Josh, will you come to Chicago and be here for the birth of this kid, I felt like I felt like she wasn't just asking me to be her brother, you know? I felt like she was asking me to be her brother and her dad and her mom all rolled into one, and I didn't want to let her down. So I said, of course, I'll be there. And so Kristen and I, we drive just right to the airport. We get this red-eye flight from Austin to Chicago. You know, we fly through the night. We land at O'Hare Airport, drunk on Red Bull. We arrive, at the hospital. I run into the gift shop that had just opened. I purchase, the largest stuffed giraffe legal in the state of Illinois, and I go barreling, through the maternity ward, and you just see, balloons and champagne and smiles and hugs in all these different rooms until finally I arrive at my sister's door. I push it open. It creaks wide, and I see lying in that cramped little metallic hospital bed my older sister alongside her husband, and together they are holding this tiny little boy named Cyrus. And y'all, it was one of the most immaculate moments of my entire life. And most of you all know this already, but life can be so hard. And life can be so brutal. And life can just beat us down so much. And because of that, I continue to be reminded how important it is to savor life when it's so good. And when I stepped into that hospital room and I saw my sister there, I felt like it was just this perfect moment that I wanted to download and make a statue out of and relive, every single hour for the rest of my life. And so I go in and Kristen comes in and my younger sister is there as well. And we're all just celebrating. And we're laughing and we're passing precious little Cyrus around, and it's just kind of unadulterated joy in the room. And it was like that until the doctor came in. And the doctor comes in and he's trailed by this little nurse, and the doctor's holding a clipboard across his chest, and they shuffle in and his stethoscope is banging, against his collarbone. And they round the side of that cramped metallic bed, and after a handshake to me, the doctor looks at my sister and he says, I'm so glad you're enjoying Cyrus, but I'm afraid I have to deliver some very, very complicated news. And it's like in a second, all the joy that had just been swirling completely unfiltered in that room. It's like it just got vacuumed right out, and instantly it's pumped back in, got all this fear and anxiety and stress and worry. And the doctor looks at my sister and he says, we're not going to know for about 48 hours. We're going to have to run more tests. But right now, based on what we have done, we know that your son Cyrus has one of two things. And the first thing he may have is something called Down syndrome. Now, if he has that, we can talk about that more when the time comes. But I have to let you know that there is a high likelihood that Cyrus has something else, and that something else is called Edwards syndrome. Now, I'd never heard of Edwards syndrome. I didn't know what it was until the doctor continued, and he said, look, there's a lot of things I could explain, but the bottom line is if Cyrus has Edwards syndrome, he in all likelihood will not live to be one. And so the nurse comes around the bed, and the doctor keeps talking, and he says, we're going to, like I said, we have to run more tests. It's going to be about 48 hours, but as soon as we know something, you'll know. And so then my sister, lying in this bed, it's like she had to relinquish this little boy that you could tell she never wanted to let go of. And she hands Cyrus over to the nurse, and following the doctor, just as they had come in, they go out. And the moment the door closed, it was like an emotional bomb went off. I just watched my sister just, kind of collapse. She just detonated into tears, sobbing. She was sobbing so hard. Her husband, who was now on that little cramped bed beside her, I could see his arms actually shaking around her with his heart as she was crying. And that's really what the next 48 hours were largely like. She was crying so much fear, so much anxiety. It's like that reminder in life that though we often forget, we're not really in control, And that any time we feel like we are really moving all the chess pieces of our life to really where they want to go, it's like we're reminded that that's just an illusion and we're really not in control. And it was terrifying. And I was angry. And to kind of cope with that storm inside of me, I didn't know what else to do but what I normally do. And typically when I get anxious, I pace. I just pace back and forth. And so for the next 48 hours, along with being in that room with my sister, that's largely what I did. I just paced up and down this maternity ward. I rode the elevator up and down, just trying to stave off this like scenario that the doctor had just presented to us. I'm drinking that horrible hospital coffee in those white styrofoam cups. And as the 48-hour mark neared, when we were like getting closer to hearing the diagnosis for Cyrus, a little piece of poetry kind of unfurled like a scroll inside my brain. Now, some of you all know this, that I adore poetry. I've always had a little bit of a connection to it. I feel like it understands me. I write quite a bit of it, so it wasn't uncommon for a piece of poetry to kind of appear in my mind. But what was unusual was the source of this poetry. This is actually an ancient poet that wrote this piece that came to my mind, and it's actually an Old Testament poet. And this little thing that he writes in the book of Proverbs, which is like right smack dab in the middle of this massive 13 million page biblical narrative, Proverbs 3:5, this poet in some cave thousands of years ago writes, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart." He did not write, "Trust in the Lord with most of your heart. Trust in the Lord with the majority of your heart. Trust in the Lord with some of your heart. Trust in the Lord with 90% of your heart. Trust in the Lord when things are going good. Trust in the Lord when you get what you want. Trust in the Lord when it's easy. Trust in the Lord when you like it." No, he writes, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding." It's like this individual writes, trust God with every single part of you, and do not rely on your own comprehension or interpretation of events to see you through. And I'm walking up and down these hallways, and this little piece of poetry is just like reverberating in my skull like a red rubber ball. And I wish I could sit here and tell you, and as soon as I thought of that, I just felt so much better. And I didn't feel better. I felt worse. Because I felt like this poet was urging me, trust in the Lord with all your heart. And I felt like I was urging back to this ghost of a poet, I can't do that right now. I don't know how. Trusting God in that 48-hour window felt impossible for me, and it's really felt impossible, or at least very, very difficult for me my entire life. When I was a little boy, my mom would come into my bedroom at night and she would read me stories. Like she would read me like from my favorite, children's books. Like she would sit by my bed, just that one little dim lamplight there. And she would read me from, Where the Wild Things Are, and the Hardy Boys, and the Chronicles of Narnia, and the Magic Bicycle, and Hats for Sale, and on and on and on. And my mom was this masterful storyteller who could just like conjure a story out of thin air, make you feel like the dew in the forest she was describing. But she also had this knack for taking a story that seemed like it was something over here, and then somehow attaching it and building into it a conversation about life and a conversation about God. And it was not uncommon for, at the conclusion of our story time hour, before she clicked off that light and left my room, it was not uncommon for my mom to give to me one of her favorite phrases. She would often say before I went to bed, even as a little boy, she would say, "Josh, you can trust God. God has a plan for your life." She loved to say that. She gave me my first Bible in 1989, and along with this long note, she wrote, "Josh, you can trust God. God has a plan for your life." And what I never had the heart to tell my mom, even up until the day she died 9 years ago, what I never had the heart to tell her was that idea of God having a plan for my life never brought me any comfort. Just zero. Because my question was never, does God have a plan for my life? My question was never, is there a way that God has dreamed up that I might live From my birth until my death, my question was never, does God have a plan for my life? My question was always, is God's plan better than mine? Because in my plan, my parents don't get sick. In my plan, they don't die. And in my plan, my dad's not an addict. And in my plan, I'm not insecure. And in my plan, I don't fail. And in my plan, I can provide for my wife better than I do. And in my plan, I like the way I look every time I look in the mirror. In my plan, everybody likes me. In my plan, I don't get lonely. And so my question was never, God, do you have a plan? The question is, can I trust that your plan is more fulfilling than mine? Can I trust that the way that you have invited me to live my life is more fulfilling than the way I would choose to live it apart from you? Can I trust, God, that love is truly better and more fulfilling than hate? Can I trust that compassion is better and more fulfilling than judgment? Can I trust, Lord, that selflessness and giving is better and more fulfilling than getting and selfishness? Can I trust, God, that generosity is better than greed? Can I trust that creativity and courage are better than cowardice and replication? Can I trust that even when I feel like I have no purpose, that there is great purpose in my life? Can I trust that even when I feel inferior, God, that my life has meaning? Can I trust that even when you feel far away, that you are near? Can I trust that the garden of scars that covers my heart can bloom and blossom into something significant both for me and for the world around me? God, can I really trust you? And can you? And do you? And do I? Do I really trust God with my whole heart? I mean, do I really trust, like the rich young ruler was battling with on his knees in the gravel, do I really trust, God, that if I give you everything, that I'm going to find more fulfillment than if I did it my own way? And y'all, trusting God isn't just something we affirm verbally. We kind of boil it down to that a lot. Yeah, I trust God. Trusting God is evidenced when we do the right thing, even when we don't understand how it's going to make life better for us. Trusting God is when we fully participate with Him in the way He has orchestrated our lives to be lived. That's trusting God. In that weekend with my sister, I couldn't do it. And to close our time this morning, and I apologize for running late again, I'll finish. But that weekend with my sister, that 48 hour, I did not trust God. It's not just that I couldn't, I didn't. And we inched closer to that 48-hour mark until finally the doctor came in. And my older sister is in the bed, and her husband, crowds in beside her. And I'm standing beside him, and my wife, Kristen, is beside me, and then my younger sister is beside Kristen. And the doctor comes in, and the nurse isn't with him, and Cyrus isn't with him, and he's got that clipboard over his chest again, and he looks at my sister and her husband. He says, "We've got the results on your son, Cyrus." He said, "Cyrus does not have Edwards syndrome. He's going to live now. Now, he does have Down syndrome, and there's going to be some unique challenges that come along for this incredible little boy, but make no mistake, he is an incredible little boy." And I looked at my sister in that moment, and I've watched her life in the 8+ years since. And in that moment, nor in any of the subsequent moments, have I ever seen her live out or say, "God, why didn't you give me the kid that I had in mind? God, why didn't you give me the kid that I had dreamed up? Why didn't you give me the kid that I have planned on?" Rather than wishing God had given her a different life, she has instead embraced the life she has been given fully. And she has loved that incredible little boy, and following her marvelous lead, I have done the same. Inspired by my sister, I have read Cyrus my favorite books. I have talked to Cyrus about fantasy football. I have talked to Cyrus about everything that I love. We play, we wrestle. He is an amazing little kid, but it was only a year after he had been born that I got another phone call from Corbett. I was in Austin, she was in Chicago. Another late night call, and she says, Josh, I know what I want to do with my life. And now I'm thinking, okay, we got the kid out of the way. Now Broadway, you and cats, me showering you with Meow Mix to celebrate, right? She goes, no. My husband and I, we actually decided we want to try to grow our family. And so now I get excited. And she goes, well, it gets better. Only this time we're going to adopt. More excited. And she goes, we're going to adopt a kid from Ukraine. That place sounds awesome. She goes, the little boy's name is Vlad. I love him already. And then the last thing she told me was and remains my favorite moment of all. The last thing my sister told me, she said, and Vlad also has Down syndrome. Coming up on the screen here, courtesy of the wonderful AV team. So on the left here is Cyrus, and on the right, that's Vlad. And every time I see these kids, and they're amazing kids, I'm reminded of the power of someone trusting God. Because this is not the life my sister dreamed of. If you want to use this word, it wasn't her plan. But my sister said, God, I don't get it, I don't understand, but I am going to try to engage you fully, trust you fully, even when it's not what I had in mind. Has it been easy? No. Is it easy? No. Has it broken her down into tears and pain? Often, yes. Sometimes we think trusting God means I at some point get what I want. It's really hard to make that argument. What Jesus says is, no. If you trust me, I'll give you full life. It may not be the life you had in mind, but you will get it. Where do you need to trust? Where do you need to let go? What's that area or areas or vast majority of your life that you are withholding from God or choosing to do it your own way? Let me pray. God, thanks for this day. God, thank you for loving us enough to want all of us. God, thank you for loving us enough to not just give to us part or most of you. God, thank you for loving us enough to give to us all of you. God, show us where we are holding back. Thank you for your grace and mercy that you walk with us, God, as we stumble our way towards loving you in return. Help us to see where we struggle to trust. Help us to not be afraid to acknowledge that we struggle to trust. In your name, amen. Thanks, y'all.
Seniors.